Good evening, buonasera, benvenuti. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Teresa Fiore, and I'm the Insera Chair in Italian and Italian-American Studies here on campus, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to the fourth part of our critical Made in Italy series, which is entitled Art, Industry, and Public Spaces. And we have several guests tonight whom I will introduce later. And to start with, I was thinking about giving you a little bit of background about how the series started and about what we do in general with the Insera Fund. The fund was made possible by a very generous donor by the name of Larry Insera. This fund has allowed us to really bring a lot of Italian and Italian-American culture, but really with the idea that we apply a sort of transnational view of it rather than some kind of conservationist view about it. We have public cultural programs like the one of tonight. Several educational initiatives that also reach out to the high schools now to create a bridge between the different educational systems. We have research projects that involve our students, and something that we've been developing in the past 3 years, thanks to special scholarships, internships for students, in particular in the fields of translation for opera. There are some students here who've been to Italy thanks to this program. And then another program which is specifically about Italian business, particularly thriving sector in the New York Metropolitan area, in New Jersey. There's a very strong presence of Italian companies. And so we've decided to be in dialogue with them to create pre-professional opportunities for our students. We give students the possibility of working for us as assistants, and in general, all our endeavors are collaborative and interdisciplinary, and as you will see tonight, is definitely a good example of all of this. The Critical Made in Italy series started in 2016, mostly when I met Daniele Balicco, who teaches aesthetics in Paris, and he published a book called Made in Italy and Culture, which is an interesting mix of bringing to the surface the so-called eccellenze, the excellence of Italian culture in several fields, but also to propose a critical reading of Made in Italy. And so, inspired by that, I invited him twice for 2 parts of this series, which became an opportunity to talk about what is definitely a crucial sector in Italy, both in cultural and economic terms, but also through an analytical lens that allows us not to talk about it in stereotypical ways or celebratory ways, which is another common approach. And even talking about some of the contradictions of this sector, and we've taken some unexpected tours in some cases. So hopefully tonight will be an opportunity to do the same. Mostly, we're interested in the relationship between tradition and innovation. Italy, as you know, is one of the most visited countries. It is actually the first destination for students interested in studying abroad, but mostly they look at it obviously as the cradle of the past, of the artistic patrimony of the past. And with this series, we also wanted to talk about Italy as a contemporary country and one of the G7 countries with all the contradictions that brings. And mostly, as I hinted at just a second ago, when we say made in Italy, we need something that is profoundly national, right? So the very term of it refers to it. But at the same time, it is transnational because it travels. And by definition, it goes beyond borders. Again, this series, like all our endeavors, has been the result of synergies across departments and colleges. And tonight we have students from art and design, Italian, business, also environmental studies, in part because of one of our guests' specific interest. So it's a very interesting mix. One of the things that we have decided to work on based on this experience and many other initiatives is the new major that we're launching in the fall called Language, Business, and Culture, as a matter of fact, along with the College of the School of Business. Certainly students will have a chance to dig deeper into some of these issues. What have we done since 2016? We started out with design, and then we continued with food and sustainability, and then the third part was about cinema and language. We were interested in looking at what kind of Italian we mean when we hear it on the big screen. And the fourth one, which is tonight's focus, is indeed art. And we decided to take it to industry and public spaces, in particular because of Francesco Simetti, who's the beginning of this conversation, an artist who lives in the United States, but also works in Italy. And through him, I had the pleasure of meeting Nicolas Savage, image specialist at Macaram, and Lester Berg, Deputy Director at MTA Arts and Design. So these are our main guests tonight for our conversation. But the evening is the result of a collaboration with the Department of Art and Design. So I'm also very pleased to have here the Department Chair, Livia Alexander, with whom I will co-moderate the Q&A later on. Last but certainly not least, we're also collaborating with the Center for Entrepreneurship, which is part of the School of Business, and Sharon Waters is here to just share a couple of words with us.
Hello, I'm Sharon Waters. I'm the Interim Director of the Feliciano Center for Entrepreneurship. Buonasera. I wanted to say welcome, and I see we also promoted this, besides promoting it to our students in entrepreneurship courses, we promoted it through our Montclair Entrepreneurs Meetup group, and I see some of our meetup members here, so welcome to them as well. So why is entrepreneurship involved in this? What does that have to do with art and industry and public spaces? Well, where it all comes together is innovation. So we have a really cool MIX lab. If you have not seen it yet, it's downstairs in room 0114. I encourage you to stop by someday. And we have really cool innovation design courses. The intro course is ENTR 260. So if you're a student working on your schedule for next fall or for next spring, just a course to consider taking. It really gets into the intersection of art and design and entrepreneurship, and we really enjoy working with Professor Alexander on that. She's been a great supporter through her department in those courses. And we really enjoy working on this event every year with Professor Fiore, and we're just really excited to be a part of it. My apologies that I'm not able to stay, but I did want to come and say welcome to everybody and enjoy the event.
Indeed, this is not the first time we're collaborating on this series. So let me start by telling you about Francesco. By the way, we have the bios of our guests available on the chairs, and we won't go over the details, so you can read while they present. But I did want to say a couple of words about Francesco, whom I've met through Vittorio Calabrese, the curator at Magazzino, a new wonderful museum of arte povera in Cold Spring, upstate New York. And when I approached him, asking him what Italian artists he would recommend to meet, he mentioned Francesco, and that's how we started chatting, and that has been for many months. But I didn't really see any work of his except for the things he showed me in his studio in Brooklyn when we met the first time. But then I happened to be in Palermo, in Sicily, when I was there for Christmas, and I was staying with a friend, and he told me that one of his pieces had actually just opened in the Oratorio di San Lorenzo, and my friend lives right across from it. So I went over, and it's one of the most magical places, I think, in Palermo, along with the Oratorio of Santa Cita, if you're in love with Giacomo Serpotta and his stuccos. And here the work of Francesco was, I think, in one of the places that speaks to what he does in particularly meaningful ways. In part, Francesco's work is about seeing and not seeing, and hiding. And this piece was commissioned to substitute a Caravaggio, a Nativity, which was stolen a few decades ago. And now every year they have a different work to substitute it in this oratorio. So the fact that Francesco's work about hiding and something that is visible and not visible is there was, I thought, a perfect encounter with this art. It is with great pleasure that I invite him to the podium for a presentation of his work. Thank you.
Buonasera a tutti. It's a lot of people here. I'm a little not used to this. Well, Teresa spoke at length already about who I am, but I'm going to try and say some more. But mostly I'm going to try and show you some pictures. And it's funny, I didn't know she was going to show this piece, and I have not seen this picture because I think you took the picture. Is that right?
These I found, but I do have my
Okay.
own too.
Anyway, but I was going to start with saying that I come from Palermo, and this is the city where I grew up. I was born and raised there by a Sicilian father and an American mother. And Palermo is a very complicated city. It's a very old city. But because I'm half American, I guess I lived it a bit as an outsider, not necessarily as a true Italian. And I think that has had many influences on my work and in my life in general. So this was my cultural landscape when I was growing up. But because I was half American, I was going to these churches to see art. I wasn't going there because I was a devout Catholic. It was a very different sort of perception. This is actually Serpotta, who Teresa just mentioned. But this is also something that belonged to my upbringing, because my mother is from New York, and she's a bit of a wasp, but not very Italian. So this is as much part of my cultural upbringing as the Serpotta and the Baroque. So I went to art school. I studied sculpture. I was carving a lot of marble. Then I moved to New York in '95. I was 27, and I've never touched a piece of marble since. I started working with what I have available, and the first things that I started doing were collages. And there were collages about, this was material that I had around me. So this was mostly from the New York Times, and it was current events. This was particularly the war in Bosnia, which I was very touched by, and particularly touched by the fact that the American response to it was very, very different than the European response. Mm-hmm. And this was the time that I was moving here, and I was sort of faced with this difference. The title of the piece is Linee di fuga, which is a double, it's like a play on words, because Linee di fuga in Italian is the perspective lines of the Renaissance, but it's also escape routes. This is a similar piece that I did right after for PS 122, which was a not-for-profit space in the East Village. And it was this frieze of refugees and military personnel, about 300 or more pictures that I had taken over a span of 4 or 5 years. and flip them all in the same direction, wrapping around the room. And this is where I really started working with this idea of like, what do you really see? These are images that are surrounding us every day in newspapers and media, but do we really look at them? And at the same time, this year's, I think it was about 97 or 98, the New York Times started doing color, and I started doing color as well. I was always still working with the images taken from the newspaper. This is a site-specific installation at Wave Hill in the Bronx, Riverdale. And I started dealing with the environmental issues. This was sort of imagining a future where every mundane action we would have to wear protective suits and gear. And these are actually actual pictures that I took in the paper, so I was not really making up things. I started working with this idea of wallpaper too, because a wallpaper is something that, for me, it's a metaphor of this idea of not really seeing what's surrounding us, because it's something that's just there and you don't really pay attention to it. You don't really pay attention to the detail, to the content. It's just company. And I felt that the flooding of images that we go through, it's exactly that. This is a site-specific installation in Villa de Verosa in January 2002. So that was right after 9/11. And it was made out of these images. These are, again, pictures from the New York Times and its bombardment of Tora Bora when the US was trying to get Osama bin Laden out of the caves. A couple of years later, another site-specific commission. This is the RISD Museum in Providence. And this is right after President Bush had declared mission accomplished in Afghanistan. And so the New York Times had published all these pictures of the happy, liberated Afghanistan, very National Geographic, very sort of awkward view on things, I thought. So I placed those pictures into a pattern that belonged to that was in the collection of the museum. It's a historic wallpaper pattern, chinoiserie, which is in itself, there's the idea of chinoiserie, of the exotic. I think it's very complicated and complex. But I juxtaposed this pattern onto this other pattern that you can barely see on purpose. That is created by juxtaposing all these images of refugees that are creating this big wall of people that are sort of coming to you. And so the play was really to challenge the viewer to see what do you really see? Do you just see the first one that it's in front, or can you actually see what's in the back as well, and which one is more real than the other? Started going big. The work sort of lended itself to this sort of operation, and I was invited by the city of Milan to cover up this historic building that was being renovated. So it was up, I think, for 6 months. And I was trying to create the idea of this vine that was growing and opening the building. But the actual image was, again, something that was related to the war in Afghanistan, the picture of the caves and the American helicopters that are trying to sneak out the enemy. But in this way that you couldn't really, it wasn't very clear. It's not it's not in your face. It's a bit, not everybody saw it. So that's really, I was trying to play with that idea, like what, again, as Teresa was mentioning before, it's this idea of the perception of hiding and showing, but playing with reality, what's really showing, I mean, it's always in our face. And at some point I started going back to sculpture. This was done for Vizcaya, which is a historic house down in Miami, Coconut Grove. And it's this historic house that was built, I mean, it's now a historic house, but it was built by a very wealthy man in the beginning of the 19th century. And I was trying here to, like, I took inspiration by the Baroque theater, the Italian Baroque theater, and I created this moving theater in the water that was narrating the history of the house and the history of this very complex relationship that this man had with nature. He picked this place for nature, but completely destroyed the place to build his palace, and then died shortly after the house was completed, and a hurricane came and destroyed the house again. So there was this really big tension between nature and this guy that really intrigued me and gave birth to this piece. So what I've shown you so far is I had to make a sort of selection of work because I'm a workaholic, I guess. I created too many things, but so this is, so far I've shown you more like a private studio in a way practice, but then I started in 2009, I started working with permanent public art commissions and pieces, and I applied to a few things, and this is a school a piece for a school in Staten Island. And a whole new mode of operating started when I started working with public art, because first of all, when you do something permanent, I think you need to adjust yourself. Like you have to be a little more respectful for your public, and you have to keep in mind who your audience is. So you might think that the styles are too different, but I think it's like this doesn't look like anything that I've shown you so far, but I think that it's a normal response when you're dealing with the public. So it's called Animality, and it's a sort of celebration of the animal world that was inspired by this publication by the UN that was warning us about the dangers of climate change and the fact that many species might disappear. And I went, again, considering the public, I went back to my time when I was a child, and I found this dictionary, my dictionary, when I was in school. So I took all the illustrations of the animals from that book, and I rearranged them in this sort of manner. And the material here is porcelain enamel. The other big aspect of public art is you start working with fabricators. You don't necessarily make things yourself. You actually design them, and then you have craft or industry make it for you in collaboration. But you heavily rely on somebody else's ability to make something and their knowledge. My second public art project was with Leicester, MTA. It's the 18th Avenue station in Bensonhurst, on the D line. This is laminated glass. Bensonhurst is a neighborhood that used to be heavily Italian American. It's now becoming more and more Chinese. So my goal here is to create something that could speak for both cultures, and so have an iconography that would relate to both. The title is Bensonhurst Gardens. Forgot to mention that in between these beautiful pictures of flowers and plants, there's also it's kind of like a Where's Waldo game that you can play. There's a lot of garbage that it's hidden in the pictures. Another public art project. This is a theater in Hell's Kitchen. Public art can last a long time. I started this project in 2012, and I still have to receive my last payment for it. It's the history of Hell's Kitchen and the sort of, and New York in general, the growth of the city, what it used to be, what it's now, and also the history of the botanical aspect of the city. So these are all flowers that used to be very common in the area. Companion piece for the glass piece outside in the theater is this little banquet area that is both for the staff and for the public. And I also started doing collaborations with companies, firms, industries, because I guess the way I'm using decoration again, I guess called for this kind of collaboration. I was not looking for them, but offers started coming. This is a small set of plates that I did with an Italian company. It's called Stoneware. It's another play on words. It's just photos of these Palestinian kids throwing rocks, stones at tanks during the Intifada in 2008, I think. Then a collaboration with Moroso, which is a furniture company. They create these, in Milan there's something called Salone, which is the design week, and every year all the companies create these really big events. They try to make a lot of noise, and so they asked me to do a site-specific installation. In this case, I collaborated with a friend, and we created this sort of station for Salone is this time of the year where so many people, so many souls are like wandering around the city and they're getting really tired. So we decided to create something that was an installation, but it could also work as a station to rest during urban wanderings. Yet another collaboration with a company, textile company based in Piemonte, in Alba. They commissioned. They asked me to go to their factory and work with the designers to produce a number of textile patterns. The company is Miroyo, and then we presented them in China during a trade show at a gallery there, Galleria Continua in Beijing. Sorry? Civita di Bagnoregio, yes, correct. Very good.
I had lunch there for my birthday.
Good for you. So Civita di Bagnoregio is a small town in Italy, as you can see, very small, that has a very strong problem with tourism. such a small town, but they can get up to 10,000 visitors in a day in certain days of the year. But it's a kind of tourism that brings havoc and doesn't bring anything positive. And so Airbnb is actually trying to do a little good. They're can be a controversial company sometimes, but they're teaming up with some small towns like Civita, and they're trying to promote a tourism that is a little more responsible by creating these Airbnbs in collaboration with artists that are trying to raise funds for the town. So I was the first one to initiate this program in Italy, and I was asked to do some site-specific work for this particular Airbnb, and I created some sculpture, some bronze sculpture. I was wrong about that, and I said I did not put any sculpture in the presentation. I was wrong. And a velvet printed curtain. So this is a detail of one of those bronze sculptures. And this is, there's this really strange landscape around Civita. It's called Italanchi. It's this really strange geographical formation. And they have these amazing wild orchids that are growing throughout. And so I made these bronze sculptures out of these, sort of inspired by these orchids. And then I created this curtain for the inside, a velvet curtain. And so over the years, I was looking at this Renaissance painting, and I was wondering where the heck these painters were seeing these mountains and why they were drawing them this way, because they're so unnatural and so weird. Well, that's what's just outside Civita. It's actually real, and that's the mountains around there. So I created this patchwork out of the small pieces of Renaissance paintings that were precisely describing these formations. Another collaboration with a handmade wallpaper company called Famscar. Again, they asked for a limited edition. These were some of the samples. And enough with the collaborations. And two more pieces, I think. This is a fairly recent piece I did in Brooklyn in a not-for-profit space. It's kind of almost like a puppet theater. Some of these pieces are on rails and they move, and it's a history of the Gowanus area, which is the area where I have the studio, which is a very polluted area. It has an artificial canal. It's a federal fund, super fund area. Lots of problems, and with a really strong gentrification. And these are all, when my flat work is mostly done on computer with Photoshop, and this in particular is printed directly into Sintra and cut with a CNC machine. So it's very, very digital, very advanced, I guess. This piece is called Curtain instead, and it's printed velvet, done for a show in Singapore at the ICA. And it's trying to make personally understand this sudden increase in nationalism and wanting to build walls and barriers through what I see in the paper and the video. And this is something that's not finished yet. Something that I'm working on in Portland, Oregon. It's the county health department headquarters. It's a very, very large project, the largest I've ever worked on. And I've been working with several different companies that make several different materials. The ones on the left and then the far right are printed tiles, but they're call them tiles is not really fair. They're 9 feet tall by 3 feet tall, wide, and they're 3 millimeters thick. And they're printed, and they're amazing. They're made in Italy by a company called Collages. The part in the middle is a mosaic done by Stephen Miotto, who I believe Lester will talk about more. This is the same building. There's glass, laminated glass with printed silk in it, and the silk was printed in Como. Again, the ceramic printed tiles. This is glass again. There's a sculpture you can see on the left, hanging from the ceiling. That's the part that is still not finished. I have to go back in June. This is the glass seen from the inside. And this is a concrete precast sheet. This is another technology that I discovered. This is a German company. It's not made in Italy. It makes these liners, silicone liners, that enable you to create these images that you can read when the light shines in a certain angle on the surface. And in this particular case, this was when it had just been poured. I left these insets so that I could put in Mosaic. Unfortunately, in this picture, you don't really read the forest as much because the time the photo was taken. But I think that's all. Not a very good way of closing, I guess, but. I hope we can. I respond better to questions, so hopefully later.
This was great, Francesco. You don't have to worry. And the art speaks for itself. This allows me to weave in a couple of words about what we're doing tonight. I didn't want to say that at the beginning, but sort of creating some links as we move forward. Francesco's art created the subject of tonight's conversation because of his collaborations with companies in so-called commercial world, although you've seen that, of course, it's of a peculiar nature, and then, of course, in the other realm that we will address later. So this is the time to invite Nick Savage to the podium, and he will talk specifically about this tie between art and industry, and at the same time, he has been very kind to actually look into the archives of Maharam and look at Italian artists who've been working for them, and of course Francesco as well. So let me exit this one. Oh, do you want to check over there? I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. Hi everyone. Oh, you're right. There's more people back there. First of all, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Nicholas Savage. For the past 10 years, I've worked for. I've been working on the Maharam digital projects at Maharam. Before we continue, I just wanted to say I apologize for any Italian words that I stumble over. I don't speak Italian. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Fiore, is that right? For hosting, and everyone for being so gracious for us this evening. Okay, here we go. Meharem. Very quickly, it was founded in 1902. It is basically a New York-based global designer and provider of high-quality interior textiles for commercial healthcare and residential interiors. It is, or was, a fourth-generation owned family. It was acquired in 2013 by Herman Miller. Michael Meharem on the left and Stephen Meharem on the right, in the early 2000s, really took it from high-performance textiles and pushed it more towards high design, sort of bordering between high design and fine art as well. We see this, the ethos of Meharem through and through. This is actually a warehouse, Meharem's warehouse in Yaphank in Long Island. Very clean, very sophisticated with its design, very intentional with its placement of pieces. This is a little misleading. This is the 16th floor at our design headquarters in Lower Manhattan. It's misleading in the sense that some of the art has moved around, and the bike has actually rode to Italy. It's a true story. Michael has since retired. He sits on the board, but he took that bike and he is in Italy. Okay. We have 3 floors, and this is the 14th floor. And when you visited, actually, I wanted to do a little more research on this because I didn't have an answer for you at the time. This is Praton, which was designed by Grupo Strom. It's a translation to big lawn, excuse me. It's actually a seat. You're supposed to sit in this. I did it once, and Michael almost punched me. This is a museum piece, and I did not know that. But what's fun about this is it plays with the juxtaposition of the era when it came out in the 60s and 70s, with a sort of hippie kind of let's get down into the grass, but made with polyurethane, moving through some of the other spaces of Meharem. And this is interesting. This is actually our showroom in Chicago, and in the back left, is an example of a Meharem digital project by Sarah Zay. Which brings us to just a few textile pieces that we did with throughout the years. Gio Ponti, who was an architect, designer, and one of the leading modernists of the 20th century. In 2002, Meharem licensed I Morosi, thank you, alla finestra. This is actually the original tile itself. It was designed to be in an ocean liner, in the portico or in the window of an ocean liner with silk. I thought it was funny and appropriate for the conversation. Here it is in a repeat, and also in a virtual installation for Privacy Curtain. Acqua e Fuoco, thank you. Same thing, very minimal, very modernist in its approach. And again, in the installation shot. Giulio Ridolfo, thank you. This is going to happen all night. I would do this anyway if we were speaking English, so it's okay. He was a former fashion designer and is a leading colorist for textiles. We have a sister company called Quadrat. They're Danish, and we had worked with them on this specific piece called Canvas, even though it's very minimal. Wide variety of colors were used for it. I just thought it was appropriate to put in. Dune, which is a rug by him as well. I've never wanted to walk on a carpet so much barefoot until I saw this photo. I don't know about you guys, but this is a really beautiful piece. All handmade and made of wool. Paolo Lenti. She's primarily known for her textiles and furniture design, her use of bold color, and also outdoor furnishings. and primarily uses felt as a lot of her pieces. Feltro, uno, due, and tre, we will get that as in uno, due, oh, excuse me, that's a close-up of it. This is all handmade as well with felt. Due, and tre. I guess it doesn't look that good up there. Let's see. Luisa Cervese. She's primarily used, she repurposes a lot of textiles. She does one-offs with handbags and will use scraps of other elements that normally would be discarded. Just again, appropriate to put in for an Italian textilist. And now I can finally relax since I know what I'm talking about. Meharem Digital Projects. In a nutshell, Meharem Digital Projects is custom, uneditioned, high-resolution, print-on-demand wall covering. It sort of acts as a surrogate between art and a mass-produced application of an imagery. We normally focus on commercial, but we do have a lot of residential applications as well. I wanted to use Robert Lazzarini chain link fence as an example of what we actually kind of build out with the artists. I myself usually work directly with the artists, such as Francesco, and it sometimes can take months, sometimes it can go within a few weeks. This is an example of a rather large one that we did. For those of you that don't know Robert Lazzarini's work, that is Robert on the left. He will take, he's a painter and sculptor. He uses anamorphic perspective to sort of make it just very interesting to see his work up front and then from different angles. This is another example of a three-dimensional skull. This is the final product, and I'm starting with this just to show you where it was and then how we created this. And that's the detail of it. And after several weeks of trying to figure out what to do, he arrived to the conclusion that he wanted to do something with the fence. And we scouted a few locations. Ultimately, we landed on Spring Street next to the West Side Highway, which I believe this was a UPS center at one time. And he loved it. He said, I want to make this, and I want to make this one of my pieces. I said, okay, great, let's do it. So we started photographing everything that was sort of attached to the fence. Details of the fence to give sort of a good sense of how we would reconstruct this digitally, and then began the process. This is primarily created in Photoshop with the photography as a reference. Sometimes the photography was not used at all and was just rendered outright with Photoshop. Once this was developed, we took it to what we're going to call the normalcy of it, which is how it would look. And to give a sense of scale, this is about 12 feet tall by about 30 feet long at 150 dpi or 200 dpi resolution. And what that means is it's continuous tone, there's no break in it whatsoever. So as you get close to it, there's no JPEG compression or any type of things that break. And then we took it into a variety of different applications, applying an algorithm that we came up with that was synonymous with his sculpture pieces as well. It's another detail. And this was nice. Oftentimes in the art world, it's a one direction. But with Robert, we were able to, sorry, I'm gonna do this because I'm kind of leaning forward on things. No? Okay. Am I too loud? Okay. With Robert, we were able to work on one of his pieces from a piece that we developed for Meharem Digital Projects. So with this piece, which we're seeing at the Marble Gallery, this is 2002, he came back to us and asked me if it was all right if we were able to use the mesh that we used for the Meharem Digital Project so that he can work and actually build that out as a sculpture with galvanized materials. I thought it was very successful. It's nice that we're able to work with the artist, and that's the piece installed as well. This handsome lad, I won't go into everything that we just went over, but we had the opportunity to meet and begin work in 2011. our journey kind of began with New World, but it actually started here with Plastic Eden in 2011. We saw this, I believe our connection was Moss, yeah. And Michael Maharam did our introductions. The nice thing about working with Francesco, obviously, is that he knows his way around Photoshop. He's very much a hands-on artist, which in this day and age is quite nice. We gave some suggestions, but ultimately it was really him. And as you see this, and much like most of his work, it gives a very decorative sense in a good way. But as you get close, you realize you're actually seeing decoys from hunting animals. So there's that push-pull sort of micro-macro thing going on as well. This is a virtual installation of it, and I wanted to share, this is an installation at Vitra House, I believe the year or two after that, I can't recall which. Recently, we had the opportunity to work on some glass, and taking the same piece but applying it to Skyline Design in Chicago, who works primarily with our glass for just a select group of Maharam digital projects. We also had the opportunity to work a few years ago on a piece called Dusk. Again, very maximum in its imagery, but as you get close, you see that there's much more going on. I believe, was this based on Invisible Cities?
Yes.
Yeah. Cecilia Armani. This is kind of interesting. Cecilia and I met through the former curator of the Highline. Cecilia is the director and chief curator of the Highline, former curator for Frieze Projects New York, 2017 Venice Biennale curator, and current curator and artistic director for Art Basel Cities. And that's her smiling face on the left. And we worked on a few projects together through Frieze and also the Highline. For Frieze, we did Al's Grand Hotel in, I believe this is 2013, 14. It's all one giant day. The past 10 years have been one giant day, it's great. But this was a tribute and recreation of Al Ruppersberg's functioning hotel from 1971. We contributed with the sponsorship towards the project, as well as the printing of the facade and just general project management. What was nice about this was you could actually win, I believe it was a raffle, or unless you had a ton of money, you could just buy a room and you could stay at the fair for overnight. I don't know why you would, but you could. Pretty interesting. I bring up John Balthazari through this for a variety of reasons. We had worked together on a Serpentine project through a wallpaper project. So he knew who we were, and he wanted to do this billboard on the Highline. And I desperately tried to find this email. What I remember in my mind's eye was hysterical. It was something like, this image with the subject matter, hey, I want to put this up because this is the first $100,000 I've made. And pro tip, the $100,000 gold certificate was used for just federal banking and not ever to be distributed. But I wouldn't put it past him to actually own a $100,000 bill. This is the final product installed. If you can compare and contrast, you can see that there was some stretching that went on with it. And the real challenge here was there's no real strong imagery that we could use, so I basically rebuilt it using line work. I kept Woodrow Wilson in the center as close as possible. Please do not tell the United States Secret Service that I did that. And this is John Balthazari's wallpaper installed at Frieze as well. Some of the other artists that are relevant for this conversation, Paolo Pivi. Basically, we took, she's very much a fan of not using Photoshop, of actually making the event happen and capturing it in these moments and being true to that form. So the piece on the left of these two zebras, for those of you who might have seen this also installed at the Highline, was the image that we used, but the problem was the format. you could see that we had to extend a substantial amount on the left and right. And I wanted to stay true to who she is and her artwork, so I suggested that we use some of the other elements and mountains that were used from the same photo shoot, but just sort of approached it as an extension, and everyone was happy, including the zebras. Maurizio Catalan, is that correct? Thank you. This was not his first choice. There's a famous photograph that I failed to put in the slideshow. I apologize. It's a knife as an eye. I believe it's a horse heart as a heart and a horseshoe as a U. And he wanted to put that on the billboard for the High Line. I don't think the neighbors in Chelsea really necessarily wanted that. So this is what we ended up with. This is actually a very subtle ad for a magazine that he created called Toilet Paper. It's a biannual visual publication. He claims it's just a fun project. It's like stock imagery for shock imagery. It's really interesting. If you get an opportunity, look it up and prepare for your seizure, especially on the website. It's intense, but this is also installed. And Matsune Mano joined me at the new museum. This past summer, we had the opportunity to work with the new museum, specifically for Thomas Barrell Playtime. Tomas and myself knew each other through a variety of other projects that we had sort of had fun with, including one at the High Line. This was sort of stemmed from the entranceway for Frieze, London in 2012, where we actually took the walls and they sort of met on the floor of these shoes that you'll see in a moment. Very iconic for him, these particular ones. And so they wanted to do something like that, very playful, very bright. And this is just an example of the installation involved, some of the schematics to prove that we're not winging it. And that is the maximized room. I mean, you're not escaping that from anywhere. It's perspective. I was very proud of how this installation actually turned out. A lot of hard work went into this. Very thankful for everyone involved. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Nick. Indeed, what Nick offered to us is what I was referring to, the possibility of looking at Italy and art from a much more modern perspective. Many of our students, of course, have a different type of image in mind, and not only you're seeing artists, of course, working on their works, but also what happens when they are part of a project, so that within a company ends up in being wallpaper, right? For example, a textile or a carpet, and that's something that we would like to pick up on during the Q&A. Thanks to Francesco's work, we also moved to the public space. He has shared a couple of images with you, but it's been a pleasure for me to also get to meet Francesco Lesterberg, who's the director of the office that basically chooses and supports the art that you see in the subway stations when you are in New York. And I asked him to do pretty much the same, although of course I had to twist his arm a little bit because he works with so many artists, and he could tell you about world art, and he's been very kind to sort of pick and choose the ones that are related to Italy, both in terms of artists and in terms of manufacturing, in terms of material. Lester?
Thank you. Hello. How many of you have never taken a subway? That's good. But we're going to get you on. So the connection between this program and what I do is that I'm the public part of the program. And since it's public, I can't say that we work with Italian artists or Italian fabricators or Italian subject matter. But I can tell you the connective thread is that the art in the subway system goes back to its founding in 1905, the City Beautiful movement, which is why there's a Central Park and there's grass in the middle of Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn, where many Italian Americans settled, is mosaics. And mosaic is an Italian art form most people would say. You go to Italy, you go to the place with the volcano, you go to Pompeii, and those mosaics are still on the wall. And the 1905 mosaics are still on the wall, which is why it makes sense for public art. So now I'm gonna sit and I'm gonna look at my watch. 15. Wave to me at 5 to 8. So, it's a school night. So what we do at the MTA, it's the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and there's 12 of us that work on art out of 70,000 employees that run bridges, buses, subways, tunnels, trains on Long Island and Westchester. We do permanent art, we do posters on subways, we commission graphic artists, we put posters in subway stations, we do poetry that we link with art, such as the Gardens of Bensonhurst. You should have memorized it by now. And I wanted to show you some newly installed projects, but you think back to the founding of the subway, they had to make it nice. Nobody ever went downstairs to travel before. It was like a scary idea, but if you put in tile, and the Times did a piece this week, on the City Hall station has chandeliers, that it was to be inviting and to make it a pleasant experience, and that's still true. So here's a project in Washington Heights, which is a Dominican neighborhood, which isn't Italian, but it's Dominican. So it sounds like it's, anyway, we commissioned an artist, Firle Baez. She has a show opening in Chelsea soon. Artists who work in the public realm have a very different audience. You've heard from an artist, and his audience are people that are interested in art, looking at art, going to galleries and museums. The industry rep is clients and institutions, and the subway audience is everyone. And in this neighborhood, it's Dominicans, and the artist who was chosen through the selection process that we always follow was Dominican. She made it a tropical landscape with charms and amulets and flowers that you would recognize if you were from the DR. And at the opening, they were like, "Ay, que linda." See, I can speak Spanish. And the artist was talking to the neighborhood women, and they really connected. And that's the nature of public art. You're not choosing to go to a museum to look at art. You're passing it every day. You're interacting with it. It should connect to you. This is another shot, and that's a mythological creature that lives in the forest. And unfortunately, she kills you after she has sex with you, but I didn't tell my boss that. On a neighborhood level, we were doing a project underneath the Dakota, which is a famous apartment building in Manhattan, and there's a little old lady who lives upstairs named Yoko Ono, and we asked if she'd be interested in competing for this project. Because again, it's public, it's government money, you can't just say, I want to work with this person. Unless you're the president, then I'm not. She did this cloudscape, she worked with a fabricator, she had designs reviewed and approved, and this is underneath her building, so it's a very local way of working with a neighborhood artist. But when you're in Manhattan, some neighborhoods are specific and some neighborhoods are for everyone. Anyone that goes to the Thanksgiving Day Parade or runs the marathon will go through this station. Not everyone, but most of them. And she has a message that I think is easy for anyone to understand. Then we go to another neighborhood in Manhattan, neighborhood. I'll try not to be too New Yorky. William Wegman photographs dogs. His studio is 10 blocks away. He was chosen by a selection panel. We wouldn't want to do this at every station, but it's a neighborhood with a lot of dogs and a lot of single people and a lot of retail and businesses. It's not just one sort of neighborhood in the Bronx where everybody's going to use the station every day. People love it. You know, they can respond to it. It does what public art in a troubled transit system should do. It sort of cheers you up. And if the train isn't right on time, you could, play with the dogs. You could pet it. On another angle, this is the first of several projects you will see this evening by a fabricator of mosaics. He's the artisan. The artist doesn't have to know how to chip the stones and make a mosaic. They find someone who can interpret their artwork and the flavor, the feeling, the mood. And in many cases, it's Stephen Miotto, who works with Trevisanuto in Spielenburgo, that's my Italian sentence, which is a town in Italy, and when they get MTA jobs, the whole town must go out drinking because it's a big deal. And when these people take vacations, they just want to go to the subway stations. Because we, as an agency, we're big, and we have 400 stations, and we've sort of resurrected in the US, I'm bragging, it's okay. The art of mosaics, making it contemporary, making it go places it hadn't gone. We use European fabricators because there's the whole history of that thing called the church and ecclesiastical, commissions, and there's craft and artisan guilds. We don't have that here, but Miotto brought the flowers from Madison Square Park around the corner underground into this historic station. We do more serious things. What do you do at the World Trade Center? And this is just sort of public art in general, but I wanted to share new projects. Ann Hamilton, excellent artist, she brought text from several sources, Bill of Rights, Bill of Human Rights, UN Declaration of Rights, had them line up. She calls it a concordance, because this is a station that was destroyed and closed after 9/11. The memorial is above ground, but we don't do memorials because it's New York. Every station would be a memorial to something or someone, but this as a sacred place, this project worked. It was, again, chosen by a selection panel. It was done by a German fabricator, hand-carved, stone and mosaic. Very different mood from flowers and dogs, but it's New York. There are 469 subway stations. Just to give you a sense of how the process works, this is an artist proposal that is seen with other finalists, and then one is chosen. Katie Fisher was chosen for a project in Bay Ridge, home of many Italian Americans, and good restaurants. This is the sample that the fabricator made, hand painting, glazed tile with mosaic. It's sort of a contemporary look at archaeology. What would you find under the station? What types of implements or weapons or combs? This is the finished project in the station. So this was done last year. Mosaics in a neighborhood scale, not far from Bensonhurst, and this also has Bensonhurst in the title. And this fabricator of mosaics was from Mexico. I also wanted to throw in some glass projects. The act of interpreting the work this is a painting, and it was made in glass for an elevated station. This is another one. The sky is a popular theme in public art in the subway because a lot of people like to bring the outdoors in. You don't really want photos of people on the subway because you're already that person. You want to go somewhere else with it. We do projects on Long Island, and this is another Miotto commission where he teamed up with a tile maker to make these little places, and this is Belmore, which is known for its expensive real estate if it's on the water. Otherwise, it's a Long Island town. But it's a way that mosaic can be integrated in tile and a contemporary design. That artist, Dan Funderburg. I'm showing you this because the artist Mark Dennis, who's a painter, his work was translated into glass. He lives around the corner in Montclair, and he said he might stop in, but he didn't. But I wanted to show a Montclair artist. Another glass project on Long Island. This is it. This is the waiting room. It really changes the whole feeling of being in a public space. The light comes through. This is the town of Brentwood, which has gang problems, and the owl is a symbol of a guardian, and the foliage is tropical from Central American countries. So, not that it's a healing place, but it's a public space, it's neutral, it's away from what the town is now known for, and it celebrates its beauty. Different elements of how you use glass. This is in Astoria. Abstract art has a place in communities. We do a lot of narrative work because that's what people connect with and relate to, but We do a little of everything. There's another piece like that. I wanted to, in my remaining 7 minutes, because I'm going to try to keep you awake. So I want to show some case studies of us working with Stephen Mioto, who is the fabricator of mosaics. He has a studio in Putnam County and works extensively in Italy, in Spielenbergo. I always want to say Spiel, but that's me. Yeah. The artists choose the fabricator, but we sort of make the marriage. Fabricator has to have work that's held up in a subway system. It's 24/7. It's got to be there 100 years because we're not fixing it, replacing it. And mosaics you can easily clean. So here's a project in the Hudson Yards, which recently had its opening, but years before it had its subway station. We commissioned an artist who was a fiber artist, African American, never did public art before, competing against really famous artists, and she came in with a shoulder bag, her knitting, and an oil pastel showing the color she wanted. And it was the most genuine, joyous piece, and it worked in that spot. So how do you convert yarn to mosaic? Easy. Because you got a blue sweater, it's not just one blue, it's a few blues. It's the same with mosaic. So this is what she did with, that's Stephen Mioto, we always call him by his last name. There's a lot of Stephens. They're at the studio picking colors. That's one of the most important things. And just seeing color the same way with your fabricator is important. Then, of course, there's the Italian crew that comes in. They're specialists. You don't have a union guy who does bathrooms to a mosaic. You have to piece everything together. It comes in puzzle pieces with numbers. It's reversed. I've learned this from watching. So this is some shots of the installation at that site. Here's the artist being very happy. Since this project, she's doing the Martin Luther King Library Rotunda in Washington, D.C., and 4 other projects. And it's happy work. It's about the cosmos and creativity and energy, and it's based on the Afghans that her mother piled all over the living room, as she has said. Anyone waving? Okay. So some more shots just of the installation, and then the finished project. So when you come out, you see all that new stuff that's been built, but this was part of the Percent for Art for the subway station, which is near the Javits Center. It's how you get to Hudson Yards. It's at the end of 34th Street. Another shot. Jason Middlebrook had a project in Brooklyn. But simple idea, let's give monumental status to the flowers and weeds that grow between cracks in the sidewalk and run them up this wall. We choose where the art goes, and in this station we had a big wall. We usually have walls, but this was up a stairway. So the climbing metaphor was good. He made several samples with Stephen Mioto. Here they are. He numbered, and you could sort of see it's like painting with stone and cutting the stone. This guy's in a lot of our pictures, and he's gotten older because this project is 8 years old. But you mix the color, you put it there, you work from a drawing, you refer to the sketch against the wall. It's done, you lay it out on the floor, you fine tune it, and this is in Italy up there. And then it's installed to the left. And this station was Avenue U in Brooklyn. Some more shots of it. So the collaboration, it's a very important relationship that happens in public art, because not every artist is going to know how to weld sculpt a monumental piece. But what you get at the end is just what the artist envisioned. Joyce Kozloff just finished a project in 86th Street. Parkside Portals. She's an artist who's in her 70s, decorative pattern movement, uses maps, likes the artist's hand, sort of paint. You can tell it's a painting. And she also used to live in the neighborhood when she finished art school, and she wanted to show different views of the neighborhood, preferred of now and the past. Here she is with Stephen Mioto. She's done several projects with him. There they are picking out the colors to match her paintings, which are on the table in front of her. And another. And there's a wide variety of color because the mosaic comes in glass sheets. The mosaic people break it somehow into little squares. Some are textured, some are flat, some are shiny, some are matte. Usually you want a variation to get the light to attach the pieces. This is what the room looks like. I threw in the Pope, no, they threw in the Pope, but that's the kind of work that is most often seen in mosaics. And the New York City subway. So we're a sacred space. And that's sort of, the process of building the mosaic from the paintings, the original scan, full size to the little elements. And these are all, she walked around the neighborhood and photographed the doorways and the arches and the screen doors and made them really fancy and decorative. And there she is with Stephen Mioto overseeing the installation. There's another, she wanted map views which are printed on tile, and then the really bold, colorful, she's from the Moore School, which is great in a subway station. And school kids have wanted field trips. They like to point to their building in the park. And she has the Four Seasons and the architectural detail. It's a really interesting piece, and it's different from everything else you've seen. The second to last one, one is being installed now. Derek Forger at 145th Street worked with Stephen Mioto again. You pick the colors, you work from a life-size rendering. This is about celebration and parade, and it's about people that aren't often represented in public art, and these are parades that happened in Harlem over the years when it was at its heyday. And he has athletic figures and military bands and marching groups and a very specific palette that was matched at the Mosaic studio. And it doesn't seem like a big deal, but how many African American dancers in Mosaic have you ever seen? It's great to be part of a public program that gets to hear a lot of artistic voices and has a way to bring them out to the public. And there they are working on the piece, and there it's on the floor, which of course is Mosaic. It's a Mosaic studio. The subway station under construction, and the pieces that are installed. And I hate to wear out his name, Stephen Mioto was at the station today doing the other side of the station. So finally, Rico Gatson. This is another project in which the artist chose the Mioto studio. Picking colors, you're now familiar. See the guy at the table? He was doing the Jason Middlebrook piece. This is 7 years later. Not so hard. Whatever. This piece is based on photographs of beacons, he calls them, famous people or people who went on to achieve success that are affiliated with this station. James Baldwin, who went to high school in Harlem, Maya Angelou, and there's the Mosaic and capture photographs. It used to not be able to because there used to not be such high-res photographs and digital technology that helps you translate. But the hair is the hair. Mosaic can do anything. So it's great to see that. There's our Supreme Court Justice, and when we sent her the agreement, the release, she had some changes, and you're not going to argue with Sonia Sotomayor. She wants a comma. Give it to her. James Baldwin again, that's the artist, Rico Gatson, Stephen and Rico, and the musician, it's not Tito Puente, it's not Gato Barbieri, it's not, I'll remember it later. There's our Supreme Court Justice, he's from the Bronx, this was her station. And then I wanted to end with this emerging artist named Francesco Cimenti, who has jet lag and has just woke up. This was a glass project. He was selected the same way. He reflected the community, Bensonhurst. You told the selection panel, I believe, that the plants are things that Italian Americans would have in their gardens. They were some were from medicinal. It worked because he was chosen. So the proposal board, and these things really do get shipped from Italy. I just wanted pictures that nobody else would have. And they drop them on the curb, and you hope for the best. And then they install them, and they're there forever. This is Francesco, clean shaven, pro or con. We'll get to that later during the question part. Looking at a sample of the glass, and there are some completed installation shots. And I just wanted to end with a New York farewell, because this is a graphic artist who lives in Italy, Olympia Zagnoli, and she says good night.
Thank you, Lester. Thank you, Lester, for being so Italian. I think somebody told me that you were also funny. So I'd like to invite everybody here now so we can chat a little bit among ourselves and then open up to questions from the audience.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Nipi Alexander. I'm Department Chair from Art and Design. It's my pleasure to be here this evening. Thank you, Teresa, for the invitation. And thank you so much for your wonderful presentations today, really touching on what I call the art industry public space. And I think that for me, I personally, as we chatted previously, I'm very interested in that connection between those different sectors that artists interface with, right? Artists, we tend to think about artists working primarily in galleries and in museums, but artists have always worked with industry and collaborated with industry, as well as collaborated with city agencies, etc., as part of their practice. And the way that public art has always been integral to the city of New York. What I would argue has changed so much in contemporary time, for the lack of trying to bracket it, is the way that the face of public art and what public art is has changed. If we look at public art of the past, it primarily has been sculptures of men, please forgive me, in public spaces, and what we see today is that public art can mean so many different things that go well beyond sculptures. So, to me, what is interesting or important to ask is, in what way can art play a role in our life today that goes beyond the limitation of, boxing art in museums and in galleries, and in a way that art permeates our everyday life. Whether it is in the subway system, or we go down to the station and marvel at the amazing work that Lester shared with us, to the way that industry collaborates with the art sector to create these amazing billboards that Maharam puts up, but also incorporates into its design practices and making limited editions of wallpaper. So I think those are some of my preliminary thoughts, and then also pulling them back into the bigger questions that we in our sector call creative placemaking, or the idea of the creative city. And what I mean by that is the way that art has been playing a role in the way that city planners and city agencies think about activating art, the way that real estate developers think about art, in a way that the High Line, for example, that was mentioned here by Nicholas. I'm sorry? Yeah, but in a way that the High Line has been such a successful project, but has also majorly boosted real estate prices in the neighborhood, right? So in the way that art not only affects us in what we see in the street, but also what access do we have to living and living spaces. And can we separate the two, or how can we talk about them in conversation? So these are just some of my kind of initial thoughts to start with.
Okay. That's a very profound question. It is a profound topic of, especially in the aspect of real estate. How much time do we have? It's so complex as to, it's the chicken and the egg. If there was no art on the island, it was just spaces. It's Manhattan, so that's, does the art help? Absolutely. The amount of foot traffic through there, it's, you know, any day, even in the wintertime, even when you think, oh, it's a nice gray, rainy day, I'll be able to walk on the High Line. You won't be able to just walk on the High Line by yourself. And I think that the art has a lot to do with that. I think that Cecilia's done an amazing job of selecting a wide variety of artists that represent not just the neighborhood itself, which is ironic because it is mostly galleries in Chelsea, a good part of it is. But she also has taken into consideration holistically what is art in the public spaces, if that helps the conversation move forward.
I'll jump in, although I work for a big bureaucracy, and so the public art is something that we do because we can do it. There's a funding mechanism, but we can't really change the parameters of the program. But what we can do is make sure that we're getting a full range of artists. In the public art field, there's a lot of talk about who's choosing the artists. Is it the same white curators, I'll use the W word, picking the same, you know, the people they know and the artists they know and the ones that, and when you do public art, you really have a responsibility to show a full range of possible artists and really try without quotas or getting too scientific about it, showing people that speak to a community, that represent the community. The other issue is cultural equity is something we talk about. You can't do the big fancy projects in Manhattan and then give nothing to the people in Far West Bay or Brooklyn. Everyone, now that there is art in subway stations, wants it, enjoys it, and would miss it if it wasn't there. And that's very hard to pull off when you're working in a transit system that's having its hard times, we'll say, in terms of capacity and service and all of that. So we do think about a diverse roster of artists, giving every neighborhood the same level of art. I get phone calls saying we'd love to have a way to put children's art in the subway station, which is great, but, and I say, it's not a refrigerator. It's a public space. It's gonna be there for 100 years, and if it's your kid, then it should be every kid. And then it's like, then you don't have a program anymore. So I'm the person that says stuff like that, but it doesn't answer your question, but it's sort of how it relates to the bigger world out there.
I can talk about my own experience, and I am, as you had seen, all over the place with mediums, but also I'm doing work in my own studio for a gallery setting. I'm doing it for as a commission work, both private and public. But I feel that I'm most of the time public art and the gallery museum art that you were talking about are very distinct and separate worlds, and a lot of artists are not engaging both. There's sort of a separation. It's like a career choice almost that you make. And I think the key aspect there is the collaboration. If you're doing public art, if you're working, if you're doing commission work, that implies a collaboration, and collaboration, it's difficult, it's complex. It's also stepping back and like your ego has to shrink down a little bit. And I think that a lot of artists are not going into the public art realm because they're not comfortable with shrinking their ego. It might be a little presumptuous of me to say that right now, but I think that, because I really think that collaboration is really the key word there. Like, I collaborate with Lester, I collaborate with Nick, but you also have to collaborate with the neighborhood, you have reviews, you have engineers that are involved, you come up with this big project that you want to make, and you have people saying, you can't do that. So you have to re-evaluate what are you trying to do. I don't know if that answered anything.
I don't think we've answered any question. I think we just helped the conversation move a little bit forward with it, but I just want to add on, I think to your point is oftentimes, whichever side of that fence, whichever camp you're in, they'll see a restriction of some sort, if it's public or if it's a corporation or something, and they might not feel comfortable with that. And for us, when we work, now I'm talking about Maharam Digital Projects specifically, we have a letter of agreement, and the contract is very just basic in a sense, and we have no intention of ever, there's a contract signed and you said if you're not comfortable with the way it turned out, no problem, no harm done. But that's unique, I think also comes from it being fourth generation of the family company, and that those philosophies still exist still, even though it is owned by a larger corporation, Herman Miller, they get it. They understand that they don't want to force anyone into something. But I really do feel that a lot of times people are skittish, artists are skittish about getting involved in something where they don't have complete control of it. And then to your point on it could be ego. It could, they don't want to surrender that at all.
Yeah, and also a way of seeing like a restriction as a restriction. To me, restriction is actually it's
Parameter.
It's a parameter, and it's an interesting challenge. It pushes you to try and win over the parameters. So,
And I think maybe, I don't know, is this working?
Mm-hmm.
I think Francesco's art, in a way, is responding to your question, and that's why I really wanted to, showcase his work this evening, because he's doing both in a way. He's able to be in high-end production on the one hand, and at the same time be part of public projects. He's been involved actually with the children. He's now working on a foster house in Turin, he was telling us. So it's a really, really wide array of interventions. And what really struck me about his work is that there's a line of coherence throughout that is very much linked to a certain legacy, which in this case is actually dual, given his family history and his way of working in two places and two countries and more. And at the same time, I think it's also his specific interest in today's world. And I wanted to address this other aspect of tonight's beautiful visual display of work, where I found some kind of running thread, and hopefully all of you can speak to that. The fact that painting walls, you mentioned Pompeii, right? Covering them with wallpaper has been traditionally decorative, and in a way an attempt to reproduce what's outside, which is something that the subway stations do. And I find it interesting that you have underground, what you have once you get out of the station, this mirror effect or effect of anticipation or staying with the memory of something that you've seen. But when it's about nature, it's a really interesting subject today, right? And so the fact that there's a recurrence of floral images, botanical images, in places where all of this is disappearing. I was at Hudson Yards just 2 days ago, and I think there were just some violets that had been, planted 2 minutes before, right? Clearly we live in environments where nature is being denied, increasingly so, right? And so I would like to hear more about this relationship with something that is disappearing. You've been interested, Francesco, in hiding migration, refugee, war, but in a way, even what you're showing and what catches the eye of the viewer is what is disappearing. And Lester shared so many works that are a celebration of nature. And so I would like to address this tension between something that is disappearing and that we crave for, and the place of public art, or also domestic art, the moment it becomes wallpaper, and that desire of having nature around us.
I mean, we do find that a lot of artists propose nature, flowers, birds, bees. That's what gives them joy as an artist. That's the work they create, and it is very popular. There is something about seeing nature recreated in art. It's not the most cutting-edge contemporary thing that an artist can do, but our audience is everyone. It's not people of a certain age and education that are going to galleries or museums, and it's something that they get. And also, subways may not be the most cheerful places without the art, and it just livens them up. I showed you 28th Street with the magnolias in the corner. I mean, social media is something relatively new it's not that new, but in public art, you get a response immediately. It's not just knowing that people are hanging out at a place. It was called the most Instagrammable subway station in New York. Like, who knew there was such a thing? People just love it, and they love it as a background, and that it has to do with the scale, the color, the warmth, bringing in organic to an architectural place. A lot of architecture is not warm and fuzzy, especially in New York, especially institutional architecture, which is the subways. I mean, that's why, for me, we see a lot of nature. We also see night and day because it's the rhythm of commuting. A lot of people have a morning on one side, especially in the suburbs. But I'm just talking so that Francesco can shape his thoughts and speak.
Thank you, Esther. My pleasure. I think that true nature is gracious and it's pleasant to see, but there is, I think, undeniably a crisis, and I think a lot of the urge that artists have to depict nature is a response to that crisis, and so it's a desire to have more. It's true, it's not necessarily as direct as a expression of desire, but I think you can probably see underlying all of this nature work an environmental subtext, I mean, in my piece in Bensonhurst Garden, it was the Chinese and Italian nature, botanical plants, but again, I had garbage, and so I'm sorry I didn't have any details of it, but it's this tension between the good and the bad, and that sounds horrible, but tension. I think it's essential to the discussion. I think it's not just nature in its like prettiness. It's a tension. There's something going on, and it starts from this problematic situation where we had decided. I mean, we are nature, and we keep talking about nature as something else, and that's the bottom line. That's a big issue that we have. So we're depicting nature. It's like we are nature.
That's actually really good point. Okay? We often exclude ourselves as being part of the animal kingdom. We're animals, and we need to connect to. I think there's something within us in our genome that makes it very pleasant. to your point, I think also that you can have complex moments where it's not just a pretty flower, that it's something deeper. But it's really kind of up to the audience to sort of choose if it is or not. Sometimes people just want to see it. They don't want to see past what's more complex with that. For the project that I've been working on for the past 10 years, I mean, it's easy, we could say stripes and colors. They sell well. They do really well, but we're not necessarily about that. You want to push it a little bit. You want to, make sure that it's not just the 1% of the 1% high art that no one gets outside of, I don't know, Tribeca. You want it to be something that's accessible for all people. And I found and discovered that a lot of scapes do very well. Usually not urban setting, but vistas that are projecting mountain ranges or things that take someone from this jungle of concrete that we live in oftentimes and allows us to explore that fantasy in our head, even if it's for a moment while we're in an elevator or on the subway. And I think that for me personally, is why I find myself staring at, the 28th Street flowers and, your work as well, because it's accessible as I want it to be for that moment. It can be deeper, but it can also be, we shouldn't be afraid of it being a pretty thing also. My just
I just want to comment with a little anecdote. I just came back from Istanbul where the new airport just opened. And the Turkish authorities apparently cut down major parts of the forest outside of Istanbul to build this new airport. The new airport, which destroyed all the forest, has plastic flowers and chirping birds in it as part of its own kind of art aesthetic. So just something to think about. But I think you raise a really important question, which I as a curator have, is what happens to, I was stricken, Francesco, by the work that you do as an artist really resonated with me in terms of the criticality and how you're hiding this commentary into the work. What's visible and that's what's not visible. And yet when you take it into the public sphere, do you feel that criticality or that kind of edge is maintained, or do you feel that you need to tweak it because it has a different function?
It's a tough one. To a certain degree, I think you do have to tweak it, because you all of a sudden have a much more specific function and a much more specific target. Your public is defined depending on what project you're working on. For instance, in the last project that I showed, the Portland, the health department headquarters, the imagery that I used in that project is all local, Oregon-based landscape. And I wanted to work on this idea, precisely this idea that we're pulling ourselves out of the equation, we're not considering ourselves nature. So I'm trying to make these landscapes that only apparently look really reassuring and nice, but actually are telling us there's something wrong with it, and it's not clear what it is exactly. But at the same time, this is a health department. They have clinics, they have a pharmacy for methadone distribution. So they have a user base of people that come into the building, and they specifically asked me, the commissioner asked me, I couldn't use images that would upset too much. So I was asked to tone down to a certain degree what I was doing, because it did have a function. It's you know, it's public money spent for the public, and as an artist you do have to consider that when you're designing your project. And it depends. I mean, in some other situations, I was I don't remember exactly what it was, but I was told, no, look, we chose you because you talk about these things. You can't just like wash it. You have to make it. We want you for that, and so I had to bring it up again a little bit. So it's a constant balance, I guess. But yes, public art does have. It requires a bit of tweaking.
Perhaps we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. Anybody who's interested in jumping in? Patty, there's a microphone coming.
Go here.
Yes, this is for Francesco. So Teresa mentioned it, there's a political thread. I don't know whether to call it activism, because I don't have another word for it, but in your work. And it was interesting that it stretches from Palestinians to the environment, to Afghanistan, to George Bush. And you grew up in Palermo, a city with a lot of issues and problems. And I'm just wondering, you know, if you've ever treated that from the same point of view in your work so far, or if you plan to. Sorry.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I'm just trying to think of what. I don't know that I mean, the environmental. Yes, I've been using imagery that is specific to the stoneware, the Palestinian kids, or Afghanistan. But for me, it's more important to try and level. I mean, these are universal problems. They're not. I'm not necessarily siding one side or the other, and I don't want to be too specific. And yes, I grew up in Palermo. Yes, Palermo had lots of problems, but I'm not too interested in staying so regional, I guess, so specific to it. I mean, I grew up there, and I was certainly involved in politics, and I was an activist when I did my civil service there. I was working on the anti-mafia group, but I feel that there's a place for active. It's hard to. It might not make sense, but activism and politics and art are different. I mean, I am talking about these kind of issues, but activism is something else. I mean, there is activist, there is relational art, there is art that is more activist, but it's not what I make. It's not what I do. I still like to create images and tell stories.
And if anything, I think, when I think, for example, of the villas by Basile from the turn of the century, last century, if anything, those were the decorative elements that I found in your work. I don't know if there is any direct relation, but these are places where you are enveloped by reproduced nature, something that would recall some of Francesco's work, and yet at the same time, then you have this type of layer. Palermo has problems, but certainly is a gold mine of artistic inspiration, influenced by all kinds of civilizations. Any other question? The buongiornos. Thanks for coming.
A very practical one for Francesco.
If you put it close, sure. Yes.
Okay.
So a very practical one for Francesco. So you mentioned all of these photographs and things coming from the New York Times and other media.
Yes.
So do you need to secure permissions, or is this fair use transformative?
That's a hard question.
Yes, that's what I wanted to ask.
It depends. I mean, I expect that at some point I will have to go to court. I won't lie about it. But I have spoken to copyright lawyers. There's no black and white. The fact that I'm using so many images and putting them together, and it's a collage essentially, changes the game quite a bit, and also the fact that there is social criticism. It's also something that opens up a little bit, more the arena. When I do public art, permanent public art, I make sure that I'm using things that are not from the Times, but they're from like the piece that I did for the theater with the glass piece with the Hell's Kitchen history. I went to the public library and I bought a lot of images from their collection. So
I had hoped maybe you'd say it was transformative and it was okay, but I know I didn't.
no, it's not. It's really not. I mean, every time there's a new case, I read what the outcome is, and it goes. One time it goes in favor of the artist, one time it goes in favor of Disney. It's not. It's an ongoing battle. It's not clear. I feel that at this point with like the overflow, we're flooded with so many images and internet and to think that you cannot use images like that anymore, it's just very outdated. But it's still an open question.
Plus your work is the only paper that becomes a wallpaper.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're doing it commercially too, I mean, there's I think you still have to be careful with it, but there's also differences. Like if you're taking somebody else's picture, one picture, and you're claiming it's yours, then that's not okay. But if you're, I mean, my work, some of my wallpaper, my patterns, not the commercial one, but the one that are talking about like more hot topics, they make sense because I'm using real images and lots of them, and I'm putting them together. It just wouldn't, like the column of people, the amount of people there, the amount of different pictures that were put together, that's what made sense in that piece. And it makes also harder for somebody who's after me to sue me because I've used their picture. I've used so many pictures, and yours is not even recognizable as much anymore. And in any case, I am saying I took it from the newspaper. It's not, I didn't take that photo. I'm not claiming that.
That was very reminiscent of Il quarto stato di Pelizzo da Volpedo. The references in Francesco's work are endless, and they come from really the encyclopedia of Italian art in many ways, but it's always very, very subtle and always made incredibly topical. Perhaps so we have time for one more.
Okay, I had a question for Lester, and I think it's Nicholas, but I'll start with Lester because it's a quicker question.
Can you speak into the
sorry.
microphone?
Is that better?
Yes.
More?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, Lester, I was curious, do you only work with living artists, or will you work with art from deceased artists?
Only living.
Only living.
Right.
Because
the short
Vance
answer.
Kirkland, when I saw that the woman of color that did the woven,
Zenobia.
it triggered Vance Kirkland. You should just, his art is amazing. I could see it in the subways, but he's deceased and he's from the early 1900s.
Yeah, it's, in a way, you know, we're using public money, we're giving a lot of artists a lot of work and exposure, and it just doesn't make sense for us to go the other way.
Okay, and then the other question was for Nicholas.
Yes.
Some of the images, which is some of what Francesco had done, doesn't look like to me textiles that people would use or consume and buy in houses and curtains. I mean, I understood in certain places used it, but are they, is this something that when you're making these textiles with these unique images or socially conscious issues, are the people aware of what they're buying? Or like when I saw Francesco's, that big plastic thing that had little, I can't remember, but it looked like vines, you did it in Milan.
Yeah.
Did they know what you were doing?
Yeah.
They did, okay. So do you find that there's a market for buying that? Or is it more shock factor at a show?
No, it's definitely for, we have disclaimers for some of the artists. We don't censor our artists. We do have several pieces that might have language, for instance, that might be considered vulgar to some people. But that's not our place to do that. We encourage our artists to think broader, in a sense that it is a commercial product, and that you will probably do better if you have certain parameters within your art. Something that would be able to be displayed publicly, for instance. But no, I think that most of the pieces that are successful within the Maharam Digital Project Collection, which by the way is, I think it's like 120, 125 different artists and collaborators from multiple disciplines, from photography, sculpture, painting, I think they do really well. And I think that even when you're using explosions as clouds, it's transformed in a way that, unless you knew that, what does it matter really? I mean, it's still this representation of a cloud, or it's being used as a cityscape. Or I think part of the playfulness within his pieces are that, like I was discussing, the micro-macro of things. You're looking at the design and it's a beautiful thing. And then when you get up close, you might realize with the world, it's actually decoys, which tricked me, by the way. I think you were like, no, those are decoys. But years ago, I was like, oh, I knew that. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
I think we ran out of time. I would say that it would be really nice to have close to windows, I morosi alla finestra, which means the lovers at the window. And so with that, thank you so much to our guests, Francesco.